The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished stone and living crystal. Light from a captured star filtered through the domed ceiling, casting long shadows across the assembled delegates. 300 species had gathered here today, as they did every cycle, to discuss matters of trade, territory, and the endless politics of a galaxy that had been civilized for longer than most stars had burned. Ambassador Vethkal of the Dominion was bored. He had served on the council for 200 years, and in that time, he had seen perhaps a dozen truly interesting events. The rest was paperwork, treaties, minor border disputes, and, occasionally, the arrival of a new species crawling out of their home system for the first time. Today was one of those days. Item 47 on the agenda, the council speaker announced, her voice echoing through the vast chamber. First contact report. Species designation, human. Origin point, Sol system, Orion arm. Vethkal pulled up the file on his personal display. He had reviewed thousands of these reports over the centuries. They all looked the same. A young species discovers faster than light travel, stumbles into council space, and requests membership. The council assigns them a classification, gives them a small territory, and watches to see if they survive. Most did not. The display showed images of the newcomers. Soft-bodied creatures. No natural weapons. No armor plating. No venom glands or electromagnetic sense organs. They had 2 arms, 2 legs, and pale, vulnerable skin that looked like it would tear at the slightest touch. Unremarkable, Vethkal muttered. He scrolled through the assessment. The humans had arrived in a fleet of 12 ships. Not warships. Not exploration vessels. Colony ships. Old ones. Held together with patches and desperate repairs. They had been traveling for nearly a century, the report said. Their homeworld had become uninhabitable. Self-inflicted environmental collapse, the file noted. Species rendered their own planet unsuitable for life through industrial pollution and climate destabilization. Vethkal made a sound of disgust. It was not uncommon. Young species often destroyed themselves before they reached the stars. These humans had simply taken slightly longer to fail. He looked at the recommended classification. Remnant species, Class 7. The lowest possible designation. It meant the council expected them to fade into extinction within a few generations. They would be given territory, as was customary, but no one would invest in them. No one would form alliances with them. They were already dead. They simply did not know it yet. The council speaker called for a vote. 300 delegates approved the classification without discussion. Vethkal added his vote to the total and moved on to item 48. He did not think about the humans again. In the outer reaches of the galaxy, far from the gleaming halls of the council, the human fleet drifted toward their new home. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the colony ship Endeavor and watched the stars slide past on the main display. She was 63 years old. She had been born on this ship, grown up in its narrow corridors, and would likely die here before they reached their destination. That was fine. She had made her peace with it long ago. How long? Her first officer asked. 18 more years to the system they gave us, Elena said. Another 5 to establish basic infrastructure. My grandchildren might see a real sky. The first officer nodded. He was young, barely 30, but he understood. Everyone on the fleet understood. They were not traveling for themselves. They were traveling for the future. Behind the Endeavor, 11 other ships followed in a ragged formation. 40,000 humans in total. All that remained of their species. They had left Earth 97 years ago, when the last habitable zones finally collapsed. They had traveled through the empty, dark, rationing food and water and hope, waiting for a chance that might never come. And now they had been given a system, a home. Elena had read the council's report on their new territory. A single habitable planet, barely, thin atmosphere, toxic soil, extreme temperature variations. No other species had wanted it. That was why the council had given it to them. She smiled. They think they have given us a grave, she said quietly. Captain? Nothing. Elena turned away from the display. Begin the approach calculations, and tell the other ships to start revival protocols for the agricultural teams. We have work to do. The council files on humanity ran to several hundred pages. Most of it was standard information: biology, technology level, social structures, language patterns, the kind of data the council collected on every new species. On page 47, buried in a section titled Cognitive Anomalies, a junior researcher had noted something unusual. Species displays unusual capacity for maintaining psychological stability during extended isolation and uncertainty, the note read. Preliminary observations suggest humans are capable of functioning at near normal levels for extended periods without external support or confirmation of positive outcomes. This contradicts established models of sentient psychology, which predict rapid deterioration in such conditions. Further study recommended but deemed low priority given species classification. The researcher had flagged the note for follow-up, but Class 7 species did not receive follow-up studies. The resources were needed elsewhere. For species that mattered, the note remained on page 47, unread. 18 years later, the human fleet reached their new system. They called the planet New Eden, though it looked nothing like any garden. The first colonists stepped onto soil that would kill their crops and breathed air that burned their lungs. They built shelters. They filtered water. They modified their seeds to survive in toxic ground. They buried the ones who did not make it and named their children after them. The council received a routine update. The humans had landed. They were attempting colonization. Expected survival probability, 12%. Ambassador Vethkal did not read the update. He was busy with more important matters: a trade dispute between two major powers, a territorial conflict in the core systems, things that actually mattered. The humans were already forgotten. On New Eden, Elena Vasquez died at the age of 81. She had lived long enough to see the first successful harvest. Her granddaughter, Maria, held her hand at the end. "Did we make it?" Elena asked. Maria looked out the window at the small settlement they had built. 40 structures, 200 people, a tiny foothold on a hostile world. "We are making it," Maria said. "One day, at a time." Elena smiled and closed her eyes. The humans kept building. 50 standard cycles had passed since humanity arrived in council space. In galactic terms, it was nothing. A blink. Most species took centuries to establish themselves, if they survived at all. The council had stopped monitoring the humans after the first decade. Their files gathered dust in the archives. Their classification remained unchanged. Remnant species, Class 7, expected to fade. But the humans had not read the council's files. They did not know they were supposed to disappear. Trader Kesvor of the Merchant Guild was the first to notice something strange. He ran cargo routes along the outer rim, carrying supplies to the forgotten colonies that no one else wanted to serve. It was not glamorous work, but it paid well enough. The desperate always paid extra. When his ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel in the human system, he expected to find ruins, maybe a few survivors clinging to life in failing habitats. That was the usual story for Class 7 species. Instead, he found cities. Small cities, yes, rough and unpolished compared to the gleaming structures of the core worlds. But cities nonetheless. He counted 7 major settlements on the planet's surface and 3 orbital stations around the nearby gas giant. His sensors detected mining operations on 2 moons. Agricultural domes covered hundreds of square kilometers of the planet's surface. A shipyard was under construction in orbit, assembling vessels from local materials. Kesvor checked his navigation computer. He was in the right system. These were definitely the humans. He opened a communication channel. "This is Merchant Vessel Profit Margin, requesting permission to approach." A voice answered in accented but clear galactic standard. "Profit Margin. You are welcome here. Please proceed to Station 1 for customs processing. Do you have medical supplies?" "We are always looking for medical supplies." Kesvor confirmed that he did. He had brought standard emergency rations, expecting to sell them at extreme markup to dying colonists. What he found instead was a functioning society. The humans traded fairly. They had little money, but they offered raw materials, manufactured goods, even information about the outer systems they had been exploring. They were friendly, curious. They asked questions about the galaxy, about other species, about trade routes and politics and history. and they were everywhere. HFY learned that the humans had not stayed in their original system. They had spread. Quietly. Without announcement. They had claimed 6 other worlds in the surrounding sectors, worlds that the Council had surveyed and marked as unsuitable. Frozen planets. Toxic planets. Worlds with crushing gravity or thin atmospheres. Or no atmospheres at all. The humans had taken them anyway. Why? HFY asked a human merchant named James. These worlds are worthless. No one wants them. James shrugged. That is exactly why we took them. No one was using them. And worthless depends on your perspective. We see potential. Potential for what? Suffering. James laughed. It was a strange sound, warm and genuine. HFY did not understand, but he filed his trade report with the Merchant Guild anyway. The report made its way up the chain of command. A senior analyst read it with interest. The humans were not just surviving. They were expanding. They had developed their own manufacturing capabilities. They were becoming self-sufficient. The analyst flagged the report for the Council. But the Council was busy with more pressing matters. A war had broken out between 2 major powers in the core systems. Resources were being redirected. A minor update about a Class 7 species could wait. It waited for 20 more years. In that time, the humans spread to 14 worlds. They built stations and asteroid belts and habitats around gas giants. They developed their own shipyards, producing vessels that were ugly and functional and surprisingly durable. They called their territory the Human Expansion Zone. The Council did not officially recognize it, but the merchant guilds did. Where there was trade, there was profit, and the humans were surprisingly good at trade. Maria Vasquez, granddaughter of the original Captain Vasquez, was 74 years old when she became the first human to address the Merchant Guild directly. She stood in their great hall, a small figure among towering alien delegates, and proposed a formal trade agreement. We do not have much to offer yet, she admitted. We are still growing, still learning, but we are reliable. We pay our debts, we honor our agreements, and we do not give up. The guild masters considered her proposal. The humans were poor. Their technology was primitive. Their territory was worthless, but they had potential. The trade agreement was approved. It was a minor thing, barely noticed in the broader galaxy. But for the humans, it was a victory. A sign that they were being taken seriously. Maria returned home and reported the news to her people. There were celebrations that night, dancing and singing and toasts to the future. We are not dead yet, Maria told her council. And we are not going to die. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Her advisors nodded. They had heard similar words from her grandmother. Decades ago, the Vasquez family had a gift for stubbornness. Across human space, the work continued. Miners dug into frozen rocks. Farmers coaxed crops from poisoned soil. Engineers built stations in the dark between stars. Teachers taught children who had never seen Earth, telling them stories of a blue world that existed only in memory. The children listened and dreamed of better days. The council finally reviewed the human file during a routine audit, 63 years after first contact. A junior clerk noticed that the species had expanded well beyond their original territory. Should we update their classification? The clerk asked. His supervisor glanced at the file. The humans controlled 14 systems now. Modest population, primitive technology, no military threat. Leave it, the supervisor said. Class 7 species occasionally have population spikes before collapse. It means nothing. They will fade eventually. They always do. The file was closed again. On a frozen moon in the outer rim, a human child named Thomas took his first steps outside the habitat dome. He was wearing a pressure suit that his mother had patched 6 times. The ice beneath his feet was older than human civilization. He looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. Everything, his mother told him. Everything is out there. And someday, we will see it all. Thomas believed her. He had no reason not to. The humans had never learned to stop believing. It was, perhaps, their greatest weakness, or their greatest strength. Time would tell. The Valar hegemony was not a kind civilization. They had risen to power through conquest, absorbing weaker species into their empire through force and intimidation. Their territory spanned 40 systems. Their fleet numbered in the thousands. Their soldiers were bred for war. When the Valar looked at human space, they saw easy prey. Commander Threshnak was given the task of bringing the humans into the fold. It was considered a simple assignment, a training exercise for junior officers. The humans had no real military. Their ships were slow and poorly armed. Their population was scattered across marginal worlds. Threshnak expected the campaign to last a few weeks at most. He chose 3 human colonies for the initial assault: New Helsinki, Shepherd's Rest, and Port Caroline. Together, they held approximately 200,000 humans. A small number, insignificant. The Valar fleet arrived without warning. 40 warships surrounded each planet, blocking all escape routes. Communication satellites were destroyed. Supply lines were cut. The humans were alone. Threshnak broadcast his demands: surrender unconditionally, accept Valar rule, hand over all resources and infrastructure. Resistance would result in orbital bombardment. He expected immediate compliance. Every other species had surrendered when faced with such overwhelming force. It was the logical response. The humans did not surrender. Governor Sarah Chen of New Helsinki responded on behalf of all 3 colonies. She was 61 years old, a former engineer who had helped build the first habitation domes on her world. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "We decline your offer," she said. "These are our homes. We built them. We will not give them up." Threshnak was surprised. "You cannot win. You have no fleet, no weapons capable of threatening us. Surrender is your only option." "Perhaps," Chen said, "but we choose not to take it." The communication channel closed. Threshnak considered his options. He could begin bombardment immediately, but that would destroy the resources he was sent to capture. The hegemony wanted these colonies intact. They wanted the infrastructure, the mining operations, the agricultural systems. He decided to wait. The humans would run out of food eventually. They would run out of medicine. They would see reason. The siege began. The first month passed without incident. The Valar maintained their blockade. The humans rationed their supplies and continued their daily routines. Threshnak received reports that the colonists were still going to work, still maintaining their systems, still living their lives as if nothing had changed. He found it strange but not concerning. Denial was a common response to hopeless situations. Reality would set in soon enough. The second month passed, then the third. The humans showed no signs of breaking. On New Helsinki, Governor Chen organized community meetings every week. People gathered in the central dome to share news, discuss problems, and support each other. They started entertainment committees to organize games and performances. Teachers continued to hold classes for the children. A baby was born in the 4th month. They named her Hope. Threshnak began receiving troubling reports from his officers. Morale among the Valar soldiers was declining. The blockade duty was boring. There was nothing to do but wait and watch. Some soldiers were requesting transfers. In the 6th month, Threshnak rotated his command staff. Standard psychological protocols required it. Extended operations without combat caused stress and instability in Valar soldiers. They needed action. They needed purpose. The humans, apparently, did not. 1 year passed. The Valar had maintained the blockade perfectly. Not a single supply ship had reached the colonies. The humans should have starved by now. They should have surrendered. Instead, Threshnak received intelligence that the colonists had increased their food production. They had converted every available space into growing areas. They had developed new techniques to maximize their harvests. They were surviving on less than half the calories a Valar would require, and they were still functioning. More disturbing were the reports of human behavior. They were not just surviving. They were adapting. They held celebrations on holidays they had brought from Earth. They married. They had children. They told stories and sang songs and laughed. They were laughing while under siege. Threshnak did not understand. His people would have given up long ago. The psychological pressure of such isolation, such hopelessness, would have broken them within weeks. That was normal. That was how sentient minds worked. These humans were not normal. 2 years into the siege, Threshnak requested reinforcements, not because he needed more ships, but because he needed to rotate his crews more frequently. The psychological damage to his soldiers was becoming severe. Several had requested mental rehabilitation. 2 had taken their own lives. The Hegemony Command questioned his competence. How could a simple blockade of primitive colonists cause such problems? Threshnak had no good answer. 3 years. The humans were still holding. They had lost people to illness and accident, but not to despair. Their communities remained intact. Their social structures remained functional. They had even begun manufacturing goods they could not import, using salvaged materials and improvised techniques. On New Helsinki, Little Hope took her first steps. Her mother recorded the moment and shared it with the other colonies through a hidden communication network the Velar had not detected. Threshnak learned of the transmission. He realized the humans had been communicating throughout the siege, sharing news and encouragement, maintaining their connections despite everything. In the 4th year, the Velar hegemony withdrew. There was no surrender, no victory celebration. The warships simply left, recalled to deal with more pressing matters. The humans had not been conquered. They had not been defeated. They had simply waited. Governor Chen watched the Velar fleet depart from her office window. She was 65 now, 4 years older, 4 years more tired. But she was still standing. Did we win? Her assistant asked. Chen considered the question. They had lost people. They had suffered. The scars of the siege would take generations to heal, but they were still here. They were still free. They were still human. We survived, she said. For us, that is winning. The news of the siege spread slowly through galactic channels. Most species barely noticed. The Velar had withdrawn from a minor operation. It happened sometimes, but a few observers paid attention. A few analysts noted that a Class 7 species had outlasted a major military power through nothing but stubbornness. For the first time, some began to wonder if the humans were more than they appeared. On New Helsinki, Hope Vasquez Chen celebrated her 4th birthday. She did not understand what her community had endured. She only knew that her family was together, her home was safe, and tomorrow would be another day. That was enough. It was always enough. Dr. Keth Vara of the Kavith Psychological Institute had dedicated her life to understanding how minds worked. She had studied 300 species over her career. She had mapped the mental architecture of beings that thought in colors, in mathematics, in pure emotion. She believed she understood the fundamental patterns that governed all sentient thought. Then she was asked to study the humans. The request came from the Council itself, following the Velar incident. How had a primitive species survived a 4-year siege? It defied every psychological model. The Council wanted answers. Keth Vara began with the standard research, historical records, cultural analysis, biological data. She expected to find some simple explanation, a chemical in their brain that suppressed despair, a social structure that prevented individual breakdown, something measurable, something ordinary. What she found was not ordinary at all. She started with human history, their own records, translated into galactic standard. She read about their homeworld, Earth, a planet that seemed determined to kill them at every opportunity, ice ages that lasted millennia, plagues that killed billions, natural disasters that reshaped continents. The humans had survived all of it. She read about their wars. The violence was staggering. They had fought each other constantly, killing millions in single conflicts. Any other species would have been traumatized into pacifism or extinction. The humans had simply continued. She read about their explorations. They had crossed oceans in wooden ships, knowing most expeditions would fail. They had climbed mountains that served no practical purpose. They had traveled to their moon using technology barely more advanced than controlled explosions. Why? Keth Vara wrote in her notes. Why would they take such risks? The human records gave the same answer, over and over. Because it was there. Because we wanted to see what was possible. Because we refused to accept limits. Keth Vara found a historical document that disturbed her deeply. It described something called the Shackleton Expedition. A human explorer and his crew had become stranded in a frozen wasteland. Their ship was destroyed. They had no way to call for help. They were thousands of kilometers from civilization. Standard psychological models predicted rapid deterioration, panic, conflict, despair, death within weeks. Instead, the humans had survived for nearly 2 years. They had maintained discipline. They had supported each other. They had kept their spirits high through games and songs and shared duties. When rescue finally came, every single crew member was still alive. Kethvara read the accounts of the expedition members. They described fear, yes, hardship, suffering, but also something else. A feeling they called determination, a belief that they would survive, even when all evidence suggested otherwise. We never stopped believing. One survivor had written. We could not afford to. Kethvara began to understand. She called an emergency session of the Council's Scientific Advisory Board. We have fundamentally misunderstood this species, she announced to the assembled delegates. Her voice was steady, but her hearts were racing. We assumed they were like us. They are not. She displayed her research on the chamber's main screen. Brain scans, psychological profiles, comparative analyses. Every sentient species we have studied shares a common trait, she explained. When faced with impossible situations, our minds protect us through acceptance. We recognize when continuation is futile. We stop struggling. We make peace with our fate. It is rational. It is merciful. It prevents prolonged suffering. She changed the display to show human brain patterns. Humans do not do this. Their minds are structured differently. When they face impossible odds, their psychological response is not acceptance. It is resistance. They call it hope. A murmur ran through the chamber. Hope was a concept most species understood intellectually, but not emotionally. Hope was irrational. Hope was a refusal to accept reality. They generate it internally, Kethvara continued, without external validation, without evidence of positive outcomes. Their brains create feelings of possibility even in situations where no possibility exists. And these feelings sustain them. They allow humans to function at near-normal levels during extended periods of isolation, deprivation, and uncertainty. She paused to let the implications sink in. The Velar siege lasted 4 years. Our models predicted human psychological collapse within 3 months. We were wrong by a factor of 16. And there is no indication the humans had reached their limit. They may have continued indefinitely. The council delegates shifted uncomfortably. The idea was disturbing. A species that did not break. A species that simply kept going, regardless of circumstances. What are the implications? The council speaker asked. Kethvara had asked herself the same question. The answer frightened her. Every species has limits, she said slowly. Points at which we recognize that continuation is futile. These limits are fundamental to our psychology. They shape our strategies, our expectations, our interactions with other species. We assume our opponents share these limits. We assume that sufficient pressure will cause capitulation. She looked around the chamber. Humans do not share these limits. Or if they do, no one has ever found them. They cannot be starved into submission. They cannot be isolated into despair. They cannot be convinced that their cause is hopeless, because they do not accept hopelessness as a concept. The Kaveth delegate leaned forward. Then how do we defeat them? I do not know, Kethvara admitted. Every strategy I can imagine requires the enemy to eventually give up. Humans do not give up. They adapt. They endure. They wait. She displayed one final image. A human saying, translated into Galactic Standard, "This is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end. But it is, perhaps, the end of the beginning." The words hung in the air. They wrote this during one of their most devastating wars, Kethvara said. They had been fighting for years. They had lost millions of lives. The situation was desperate, and their leader's response was not despair. It was a declaration that they were only getting started. The council chamber fell silent. They are not a Class 7 species, Kethvara concluded. They never were. We simply did not have a classification for what they actually are. That evening, Ambassador Vethkal retrieved the human file from the archives. He found page 47 and read the note he had dismissed decades ago. unusual capacity for maintaining psychological stability during extended isolation and uncertainty. He understood now. The junior researcher had noticed something profound and been ignored. They had all been ignored. All the small signs that the humans were different. Vethkal began writing a new assessment. He worked through the night, reviewing every piece of data, every report, every observation from the past century. When he finished, he submitted his recommendation to the council. Reclassify species, human, upgrade to persistent threat, recommend alliance rather than opposition. This species cannot be defeated through conventional means. Long-term coexistence is the only viable strategy. The council debated for 3 days. In the end, they accepted his recommendation. For the first time in galactic history, a species had been upgraded based not on their weapons or their technology, but on their psychology. The humans, of course, knew nothing about any of this. They were too busy building, planning, dreaming. They had work to do. 200 years had passed since the first human ships had drifted into council space. 200 years since a junior clerk had stamped their file with the lowest possible classification and forgotten about them. Now Ambassador Lin Chen stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, representing 17 star systems and a population of 4 billion humans. She was the great-great-granddaughter of Governor Sarah Chen, who had led New Helsinki through the siege. She carried that legacy with pride. The council had invited her to speak on the anniversary of humanity's official recognition as a major power. It was a formality, really, a ceremonial acknowledgement of what everyone already knew. The humans had arrived. Lin looked out across the vast chamber. 300 species watched her from their designated sections. Some had empires spanning hundreds of systems. Some commanded fleets that could sterilize entire planets. Some had existed for millions of years, ancient, beyond human comprehension, and they were all, in their own way, afraid of her people. Not because humans were stronger. They were not. Human ships were capable, but unremarkable. Human weapons were effective, but not devastating. Human soldiers were brave, but not superhuman. By every objective measure, humanity remained a minor power. But the Council had learned something about objective measures. They had learned that some things could not be measured. "Thank you for this honor," Lin began. Her voice carried through the chamber, translated into 300 languages simultaneously. "When my ancestors arrived here, they came in broken ships with nothing but their determination. You gave them a poisoned world and expected them to die. They did not die. They built." She paused, letting the words settle. "You have asked me many times over the years to explain how we survived, how we endured the siege of New Helsinki, how we colonized worlds you had abandoned as worthless, how we are still here, still growing, while other species have risen and fallen around us." A display activated behind her, showing the map of human space. 17 systems now, spread across a region the Council had once considered uninhabitable. Each one hard-won. Each one precious. "The truth is simple," Lin said. "We are very good at one thing. We wait. We believe tomorrow might be better than today, even when there is no evidence for it. We find meaning in the struggle itself, not just in victory." She thought of her grandmother's stories, of the original colony ships, held together with hope and desperation, of the first harvest on New Helsinki, celebrated like a miracle, of the children born during the siege, growing up surrounded by impossible odds and never once believing they would lose. Your scientists call it persistent psychology. You have written papers about it. You have tried to understand it, to quantify it, to explain why our minds work differently than yours. Lin smiled slightly. "But you are overthinking it. We do not have a special power. We do not have a secret weapon. We simply refuse to accept that we have lost. No matter how bad things get, no matter how long we have to wait, no matter how many times we fail." She looked directly at the Valar delegation. Their species had changed since the siege. They had learned something about the limits of military power. They were quieter now, more cautious. "You tried to break us once," she said. "You surrounded our worlds with warships. You cut us off from everything. You waited for us to surrender." The Valar delegates shifted uncomfortably. "We waited longer." The chamber was silent. "That is what you still do not understand about us," Lin continued. You think in terms of winning and losing. We think in terms of continuing. Every day we are still here is a victory. Every child born is a victory. Every meal shared, every story told, every moment of connection between people who refuse to give up on each other. She thought of Hope Chen, born during the darkest days of the siege. Hope was an old woman now, a grandmother herself. She had dedicated her life to teaching, passing on the history of her people to new generations. She had never stopped believing in the future. We have been here for 200 years, Lin said. In galactic terms, we are infants. Your civilizations measure their histories in hundreds of thousands of years. You have seen empires rise and fall. You have witnessed species evolve and go extinct. You know that time is the great equalizer. She nodded slowly. So do we. The display changed, showing projections. Human population growth. Colonial expansion. Economic development. The lines stretched forward. Century after century. Millennium after millennium. We are patient, Lin said. We have always been patient. When we crossed our first oceans, we knew most expeditions would fail. We went anyway. When we left Earth, we knew we would never see our destination. We went anyway. When you gave us poisoned worlds, we knew most of us would not survive. We stayed anyway. She let the silence stretch. The species that wins is not always the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. Sometimes it is simply the one that refuses to stop. Lin straightened her posture. She was a small figure in this vast chamber, surrounded by beings who could destroy her entire civilization if they chose. But she was not afraid. Her people had faced worse odds. They had always faced worse odds, and they were still here. We are not a threat to you, she concluded. We have no interest in conquest. We have no desire for empire. We simply want to exist, to build, to grow, to see what tomorrow brings. She smiled. And we will wait as long as it takes. The council gave her a standing ovation. 300 species, rising to their feet, acknowledging something they could not quite understand, but had learned to respect. The humans had taught them a new word, hope. That evening, Lin returned to her quarters and placed a call to New Helsinki. The connection took several minutes to establish, bouncing through relay stations across human space. Her grandmother's face appeared on the screen. Hope Chen was 97 years old, her hair white, her face lined with age and experience. But her eyes were still bright. How did it go? Hope asked. They listened, Lin said. I think they finally understand. Hope nodded slowly. My mother used to say that the galaxy would learn to respect us eventually. We just had to be patient. She was right. She usually was. Hope paused. What happens now? Lin looked out her window at the captured star that lit the council's great hall. Somewhere out there, her people were building new homes on new worlds. Children were being born who would never know the struggles of their ancestors. The future stretched out before them, vast and uncertain and full of possibility. Now we keep going, Lin said. One day at a time. Just like always. Hope smiled. It was the same smile her mother had worn, and her grandmother before that, stretching back through generations to the first ships that had left Earth. That is all we have ever done, Hope said, and it is all we ever need to do. The call ended. Lin stood alone in her quarters, looking at the stars. Somewhere out there were challenges her people had not yet imagined, enemies they had not yet faced, hardships they had not yet endured. It did not matter. They would face them. They would endure them. They would survive. That was what humans did. That was what they would always do. One day at a time. One step at a time. One hope at a time. Forever.